Hey, everybody, this is Tom Siga from Duluth Pack, and this is the Duluth Pack podcast, Leader of the Pack. Today's guest is Josh Teigen, Fishing Guide Service. I'm really excited, Josh, because I love to fish, so I can't hear. I want to learn all kinds from you, but welcome to the podcast, Josh.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tom. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, let's jump right in because I'm really excited to ask you a bunch of questions. So you live now in Iron River, Wisconsin. Is that where you were raised? Is that where you grew up also?
Yep, I grew up. I've actually lived here my entire life. I love it here. You know, it's a small town, not a whole lot of people, but I'm in a great area where I can travel to a lot of great fishing destinations. And yeah, I love it here. I don't plan on ever leaving.
You know, when a guy knows what he wants, stick with it, right? And
Yep,
you I tell
exactly.
you what, folks, if you looked at his face right now, you'd see that he is one happy guy because he's smiling. So tell us what your childhood was like, and really, how did you get into fishing? What was your first experience with that?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate to grow up on the Pike Lake chain. It's about 5 miles south Iron River. My parents have a real small house out there. It's six lakes connected to each other, crystal clear. You know, it's got muskies, pike, bass, panfish. It's got it all out there. So I mean, a couple of steps out my parents' house, and that was my backyard. So I was very fortunate. We had a real small house there, so I was always outside. You know, there wasn't much to do inside, so I was always outside playing on the water. And my parents had a little paddle boat, and then my dad had his little 14-foot boat. So I was always fishing, and I mean, as young as I can remember, I was fishing, whether it be off the shoreline or in the paddle boat or in the little boat.
So you go through high school, you're fishing, you're in the outdoors and all of this, and where what did you do right after high school to take you to kind of where you are now?
Yeah, so a lot of people don't know this. So I actually went to school up until middle school, and then my mom homeschooled me through high school. So I never went to high school. I liked school, but I was right on the edge of what school I went to. So it was an hour bus ride to school and then an hour ride back. And I just, I hated those long bus rides. And I was fortunate my mom was fine homeschooling me. So that actually got me into more and more fishing. You know, instead of spending that time on the bus and all the going back and forth or playing sports, I got to fish a lot more. I mean, we still had to do our schooling. My mom was very strict with that, but it allowed me to get out on the lake more and enjoy the outdoors and fishing.
Josh, you start fishing. Panfish at first, off the dock. You said you had a little paddle boat, and then grew into a 14 footer. Was it, what hooked you at first to just get that hook into you?
Yep. Yeah, it started with just panfish and bass, to be honest, right off the dock. You know, I mean, we were lucky. My parents have a spot where you can catch fish right off the dock. So, I mean, I grew up fishing, just catching little panfish as young as, 3 or 4 years old right off the dock. My dad, when he would go to work, he'd make sure to take all the hooks off my bait so I wasn't hooking myself when he was gone. But I remember one time I had a nice muskie come up and grab one of my baits right at the dock, but I had no hooks on it. So I couldn't even land him. So I was pretty bummed about that. But the best memory I had was when I was 7. My dad took me out muskie fishing, and that's what he really enjoyed to do. And we were in a little 14-foot boat, and I remember catching my first muskie. It was a 42-incher on a Suic. You know, I had a big orange life vest on, and I can still remember seeing that muskie come up and grab the Suic, in the clear water. And that fish is probably what got me hooked. And that's probably my favorite fish to fish for now is muskies because of that. But I was lucky to catch one at a young age, and that's what really got me into it.
So, what is a suic?
It's just a wooden bait. I mean, they're actually still a pretty good lure now, but they've been around forever. It's just a dive and rise bait. It's like a 9-inch piece of wood, and it's got a little tail on the back. So when you jerk it, it dives down about 5 feet, and then it rises up real slow. And those fish love it when it rises up slow. That's generally when they grab it. And it's got really good action, but it's been around forever. I mean, my dad used it, 20 years before I was born, and that's what he had me throwing at the beginning. But yeah, they're still around. You can still use them, and they still catch fish, but that was what I caught my first one on.
So, can you explain to our listeners, Josh, what is a muskie?
Yeah, a muskie is basically the biggest fish that swims around in our waters. They're like a pike, just a little. They get a little bit bigger. They got stripes on them, and they're a very aggressive fish. They call them the fish of 10,000 casts. So it's not something you just go out and, you're not going to catch 10 of them in a day. Although if you're in certain bodies of water, I mean, you can have an exceptional day that's almost unheard of, but they're very rare. Not rare, but they're hard to catch. So that's kind of what got me into it, just the passion of chasing them. And, you catch one in a day, that's a great day. I mean, some days you fish, 10, 12 hours, you might not even see one. But the cool thing about muskies is they love to follow. So you get to visualize them fish, coming right into the boat, and sometimes they bite right at your feet and sometimes they don't, but they kind of haunt you. They're a fun fish to chase.
Josh, I've heard the term muskie hunting,
Yeah.
that you kind of hunt them and maybe instead of fish them.
Oh yeah. No, that's very accurate. No doubt about it. They're very elusive. But that's what makes it so fun. It's just, it's the challenge. It really is.
42-inch, your first muskie you catch, I believe you said 7 years old. How big is pound wise, how big is a 42-inch muskie?
That fish was probably about 20 pounds. I'd say most 40 to 43-inch fish are going to be about 20 pounds on most lakes.
So we're talking a really big fish,
Yep.
a 7-year-old kid, and you hooked it, but it hooked you too, right?
Oh, it did, no doubt. That got me into it full bore, that's for sure.
And when you're muskie fishing, is this hey, we keep muskies and they're table fare? Is this a catch and release?
Yep, it's all catch and release. It's pretty frowned upon to keep one. I remember at the time when I caught it, I really wanted to keep it, and my dad's like, "No, no, we got to let those go." And I know I remember I started crying because I really wanted to keep it, but now I'm glad I released it because yeah, there's not a lot of them, and you catch a lot of the same fish over and over. Growing up on the pike chain, we had a decent population of muskies, so there's a few of them I would have names for where I'd catch the same fish 2, 3 times in a year, and that's what catch and release does. Someone else can enjoy and catch that same fish again, and that's why I release them.
So you are a fishing guide, a licensed fishing guide. What goes into the career path to become a professional fishing guide?
Yeah, I mean, basically you want to be, obviously you want to be a good fisherman, but you also want to be good with people, and you want to be able to teach them what you've learned, and you want to be able to help them catch fish on their own. But as far as getting started, I mean, in Wisconsin here, you just got to get a guide's license. You fill out a piece of paper, and I think it's like 40 or $50, and just like that, you're a fishing guide on the inland lakes. Now, I guide on the inland lakes all around, Bayfield County, Douglas County, but then also I guide on like the St. Louis River, Lake Superior, Chequamegon Bay. And to do that, you got to have your captain's license, and that took a little more time to get. There's a lot that goes into getting that.
Is that the license that we've all heard called a six-pack license?
Correct. Yes. Yep.
Can you explain what that is and what you have to go through to get that? So you have your license to be an inland guide, and then
Yep.
you have your license for the Great Lakes.
Yes. Yep. And I think it includes ocean too, for a certain amount of miles offshore. But it's basically a course through the Coast Guard. I think it was 2 to 3 weeks. It's a really hard course. I mean, you got to study hard for it. Um, it's a lot of testing, so you got to know all the rules of the waterways. You got to have certain amount of hours before you can even take the test. You have to be on I think it's 360 days in 5 years. You got to be on the water on Lake Superior to get it. I mean, you got to have experience out there yourself. So that took a while to get, and that was a lot of testing and sleepless nights, because that's when I took that course, I wanted to pass, and a lot of people fail. Not a lot of people, but there is a little bit of fails that happen too. So I want to make sure I was ready for it. But yeah, you learn a lot of different stuff about the waterways, boats, certain knots you tie, and I mean just a lot that goes into it. And then at the very end, you take testing, and you hope to pass, and then you're qualified for 5 years, and then every 5 years you got to renew it. So it's a strict thing, and it's good. I mean, that's when you're fishing big water like that, or like the St. Louis River, you got to know what the buoys mean and where you're going and who's got the right of ways and all that kind of stuff. So
Is there a lot of expense accrued in taking that test?
yeah, starting out, I think it was I don't know what it is now, but it was a couple grand, I believe, just to get all the stuff. You got to pass a drug test, you got to pass a physical. There's a lot that goes into it as well. But once you got it, to renew it, it's not too bad. Every 5 years, you got to renew it.
So we as customers of guide services, if we're going either inland or even more so on the big water, on the Great Lakes or on the ocean, that rest assured these guys have put in their time and they've been tested and they really know what they're doing.
Yes, exactly. Yep. We know what we're doing. We've been through it all, and yeah, we know we're experienced, and yeah, that definitely gives us a step up as far as being able to guide on the big lakes.
So how then you start your business, you have these licenses and you're going to become a guide, but hey, you're just hanging the shingle out the first time. You're an entrepreneur. How do you
Yep.
get going and how do you start getting your clients? How did that work for you and what is typical of your industry?
Yeah, so it was kind of cool how I got started. When I was 17, 18, and I honestly didn't know what I was going to do. Um, I knew I loved fishing, but I never thought I'd be able to make it full time, being a full time guide. Everyone told me, oh, that's not possible. That takes forever, yada, yada. But I just love fishing. So I always told my parents as an excuse, I'm going to be a fishing guide. I just wanted to fish more at the time. But everyone kept telling me, you should get a Facebook account and start, posting pictures of the fish you're catching. I was 17, 18, and I fished the pike chain a lot. It's kind of a funny story. I waited until I was 18 to get my driver's license rather than do it when I was 16 because I wanted to spend the money and buy a boat instead of buy a truck. So I waited till I was 18. So luckily I was on the pike chain, so I could use my boat. I had a couple other jobs on the pike chain. I was actually a cook for a few years, and I drove my boat to work. But I could drive my boat to work. I could guide right on the pike chain. I could fish all the time out there. So so that helped. But what I did is I started posting those pictures of the fish I was catching on Facebook. And a guy by the name of Jim Hudson reached out to me. At the time, he was a big time guide on Chequamegon Bay all over. He was on TV all the time. He fished with a lot of different TV hosts, fishing shows. And he was a guy I looked up to. And he just happened to reach out to me on Facebook. He saw the pictures I was posting. He's like, hey, is there any chance you could, help me in the winter with my guide service? So he ran a guide service on Chequamegon Bay and the Apostle Islands ice fishing, and he wanted me to basically help him out, as far as like drill holes, set the shacks up, just help out with clients. He was taking us to the spots and he had all the gear and snowmobiles and stuff, but he just basically took me under his wing and wanted me to help him out. And so that's how I got started. I met a lot of top guys in the industry through him. Now, unfortunately, he died about, I think it was 10 years ago now. He put a snowmobile through the ice. So that was pretty tragic, but I learned a lot from him. He kind of taught me the guiding aspect of it, and that's how I got my start is through meeting him and getting to fish with him.
So you're talking about ice fishing now. Let's put that on
Yep.
the side. We'll get back to that in a
Yeah.
minute here.
Yep.
Because you talked about muskies,
Yep.
but I went on your social media and you fish a lot more than just muskies. So talk about some of the other species that you specialize in that customers could come to you. And by the way, you're talking about northwestern Wisconsin, the Apostle Islands of Lake Superior, Chequamegon Bay of Lake Superior for our listeners that aren't from the area.
Yep, and that's what's great about our area, as you know, is there's so many options. I mean, within an hour where I live in Iron River, I mean, I can go to the St. Louis River, fish for walleyes or crappies. I could go to Chequamegon Bay and the Apostle Islands, and we can target lake trout, splake, browns, salmon, bass, pike, perch, and then we got all our inland lakes around us where we can get into crappies and bluegills and largemouth and muskie and pike. So that's what's really nice about my guide service, and I'm lucky, where I live is I can target all those species in a trip. So when someone books a trip with me, if they have a specific fish they want to target, we can do that. But at the same time, if they want to come up and say, hey, let's just fish for whatever's biting best, there's times we'll go out on Chequamegon Bay in Ashland and we'll fish for smallmouth bass out there for 4 or 5 hours. And then, if they want to try something different, I'm like, all right, well, let's go inland. Let's go to let's say Pike Lake chain and let's go catch some largemouth and crappies out there. So that's what's really nice about this area is I have a lot of options and I can accompany a lot of different people and what they want to fish for.
Let's talk about your equipment, Josh. Inland lakes, what do you use for a boat? What do you use for different equipment that you would use on a daily basis if a client hires you and says, I want to go muskie fishing, or hey, that's not working out. We're not getting any today. Can we go get some bass to at least catch some fish?
Yep. Yeah, so as far as equipment, I mean, my boat, I run it on the big lake and inland. I got a big tiller. I got a 21-foot Alumacraft Competitor. It's a big tiller, a lot of room. I can hold up to three, sometimes four people in it besides myself. And I got a 175 Yamaha on the back. So that allows me to not only fish the small lakes inland, but I can fish the big lake with that too. I mean, obviously I got to watch the wind, but yeah, for inland, I got the panfish rods, just your ultralights. I always have those in the boat. So if we want to target panfish, and then you got your medium or medium light action rods if we want to target bass or walleyes. And then the musky stuff, you got your big baits, some of them weigh up to a pound, and you got your 100-pound test line and your, heavy rod, that's up to 9 foot. And I got all the equipment that we can target whatever people want to target.
Josh, somebody hires you, they literally just have to show up.
Yep. All they got to do is show up. The only thing I require is just bring something to eat and drink for themselves for the day, and obviously bring a fishing license. But other than that, I have everything. I got all the rods, reels, tackle. I always tell people, if they got a favorite rod or a favorite lure or something they want to bring it, I got plenty of room. You can bring it. But if you don't want to bring anything up, that's fine. And a lot of people fly up from a long ways away. I get a lot of people that fly up from down like in Louisiana or Arkansas where they fish largemouth down there and they want to come up here and smallmouth fish. And it's nice, they can get on a plane and they don't have to pack a bunch of fishing gear. They can just hop in the boat and I got everything they need.
So your reach is quite large. You're getting people from Louisiana. How did these people find out about you, Josh?
So most of them, I'd say 95% of my business is from a show called John Gillespie's Waters and Woods. He has a show that airs all over the country, mainly in the Midwest. That he has a brand new fishing show every single week. So he does 52 shows a week, and it's strictly fish, or 52 shows a year, and it's strictly fishing. So a lot of people watch his show, and that's where I get a lot of my business from. And so I met him through that Jim Hudson that I used to guide with. And so I'm one of John Gillespie's main guides. So his show is based on he fishes with guides all over the Midwest, and I'm one of his guides for up in this area. So what he'll do is we'll set up. Usually I film with him probably 4 or 5 times a year. He'll let me know when he's going to come up, so we reserve it in the calendar. And then he'll come up, we'll film a show. And the cool thing about his show is it's recent. If we like say we film a show today, it'll air this, the next coming weekend. So it's all recent, and a lot of people watch his show. So when we have a really good show, let's say we catch a ton of bass and walleyes, I mean, when that show airs, he'll put my phone number up at the end of the show, and my phone will just blow up from people wanting to come up here and fish. So I was really lucky to meet him, and that I'm one of his main guides. So I really don't have to worry about advertising anymore because of that. It's pretty cool how it worked out.
So let's talk about being on film, because fishing with customers in your boat, let's say one or two guys, and you're zinging lures all over the place, musky fishing, is one thing, because you can just have your normal chats. Now there's a camera rolling.
Yep.
Let's talk about the difference, because it obviously must make a difference. And my follow-up question would be, if a half an hour show on TV, how many hours did you film?
Yeah, that's definitely a thing. You got to be careful what you're saying. You got the camera on. You don't want to look too stupid if you do something with your rod, or you break a rod, or you lose a big fish. But yeah, it's definitely different when you're filming. We usually set up 2 days to film. And, there's some days where we'll get a show. Usually you need about at least 10 to 15 nice fish to get a good show. And sometimes that takes us 2, 3 hours. And then there's other times where it's tough fishing and it'll take us the full 2 days and we'll barely squeak it out. And that's fishing. I mean, you never know what's going to happen, and that's why they call it fishing and not catching. But you always hope for the best. But that is the tough part with filming. You only got so many days to do it, and you got to get it done. And you always hope that the fish are cooperating.
How about stress level? Cameras rolling. You're out there with old Tom Siga today, without the cameras rolling.
Yeah.
Whole different level of stress and an agenda that you're trying to get through.
Yeah, it definitely. I mean, when I first started, when I had a camera on me for the first time, I'll admit the first few shows I did, I was always nervous. I was scared to death if we'd get a show. I wanted to go perfect, but after a few years of fishing with John and the guys that he brings with, I mean, I got to know them all. And so now I don't feel as much pressure. I mean, they know it's fishing just like I do. So if the fishing's tough, they razz me a bit, but we all know it can be tough at times where, with clients in the boat, there's no camera. You're not as nervous unless it's a tough bite. I mean, always when it's a tough bite and I got clients in the boat, you always get a little nervous. You got to put them on fish. So you get that way. But yeah, the fishing out when you're catching them, it always makes things a lot better.
I would assume so. Josh, on your website or on your social media, I should say, lots of different species. So when you're inland with muskies, bass, mostly catch and release, I'm assuming. How about panfish and walleyes?
Yeah. With the muskies and bass, we're all catch and release. But yeah, I mean, if guys come up and they want to bring fish home, that's for inland. That's when we'll do the panfish. We'll go out for some crappies and bluegills, and we'll fish walleyes. And one thing I always like to preach is, we like to let them bigger fish go and keep the smaller fish. Those bigger fish, you want to put them back, you want to let them grow and keep the genetics in the system and keep those smaller ones that are the better eaters anyway. Let's say you keep a 30-inch wall. I mean, that's not going to be good eating anyway. That's a fish you want to put back and in the system. So yeah, if people want to come out and they want fish to keep, we'll focus on the panfish and the walleyes, and we'll have those certain, even if the regulations are, hey, you can keep 3 over 18, 3 walleyes over 18. We want to look for those 18 to 21-inch fish to keep rather than the real big ones. We want to let them go.
Sure. And then you catch those fish and people want to take a couple home to have some great table fare of the panfish or a walleye, something like that. After the end of the day, you take care of and process all that for them so then they can put it in the cooler and head home.
Yep. For open water fishing, I got my fillet board in the back of the truck and I fillet them up for them, give them a bag, a Ziploc bag, and put the fish in there, and then they can take them home and eat them from there. But yeah, it works out good for open water. Yep, I can clean them right there for them.
Okay. Talk about the safety gear that you have to have in your boat. I'm assuming that it's the same for inland and the Great Lakes, or is it different? You just have it all.
Yep, I got it all. For Great Lakes, there are a couple more things you got to have. I can't remember exactly what it is. I just have it just because I know I need it for the Great Lakes. But you got to have flares. You got to have a fire extinguisher. I got a ladder on my boat in case someone were to fall in. That I don't think is required, but I think most boats you buy now that comes on them standard. And then obviously life jackets and a throw cushion where if something did happen. Now for the Great Lakes being a guide, I have to have special life jackets. I think they're type 1 life jackets where they got a whistle on them. So if you were to fall in, you can blow that whistle. That's something that's specific for the Great Lakes. And if you're a charter captain, you got to have those special life jackets versus just a regular life jacket that you'd buy in a store.
Josh, when you're going on the Great Lakes or inland, do you have to file like pilots do, like a daily log that, where we have this many clients? What type of record keeping is there in your business?
Yeah, so for inland fishing, there isn't anything, but fishing on the Great Lakes, there's an app that the DNR came out with last year that you have to file reports each day of how many fish you catch, what species it was, how many of those you kept, how many released, how many people I had in the boat with me, how many hours we fished. And so each day I got a report at the end of the day and I got to send that in. And they keep track of all that. It's just a big log. And that actually is a good idea, that so they can get a better idea the fish catches that are coming in and what's going on with all the guides out there. But that's just a big lake thing, like St. Louis River or Chequamegon Bay or the Apostle Islands, Lake Superior thing. Inland, you don't have to have that.
Okay. You mentioned the DNR there. Do they share that information then back with the public or with guides? Because you're putting into this app, do all the guides get information back saying, hey, here's last year's statistics? Is there a way for you to find that out since you're putting in?
Yes, yep. They usually send us an email every year of the statistics and how many charter captains were at each area and what was caught. Not exactly size wise, but how many fish were caught, how many were kept, that sort of thing. So yeah, they do fill us in, which is nice. So then your reports are going somewhere and you can actually look at them and see how everyone else did and that kind of stuff. I mean, they don't tell you who did what, but just a general fish population of what was kept, what was released, that sort of thing.
Okay. Uh, Before we go on to the next thing, folks, We're with Josh Teigen today from Josh Teigen's Fishing Guide Service out of Iron River, Wisconsin. You can look him up on social media. We'll get into all the handles in a few minutes here. Josh, I want to ask you a question about relationship with the Department of Natural Resources. Obviously, you are somebody who's giving them valuable information when you're out working every day with your clients. How does that relationship work with the people in the field? Do you get to know all the different agents and build relationships and trust and all of that, so that it's so many people you hear that, they're afraid of the DNR, and they're just out there doing their job. There's nothing to be afraid of, just follow the rules. But how does that relationship with, captains go?
Yeah, it's a great relationship. I mean, they're really nice people. They're just doing their jobs, and what they want is what we want. We want to make sure no one's breaking the rules or doing something they shouldn't. And they have a hard job to do, and I couldn't do it, but it's great to have them out there, and they've been great. And if we have any issues or something, we can talk to them and they can talk to us, just so we're all on the same page. And yeah, I know a lot of them, and they're really nice people, and it's really great to have them, just to have everybody's safe and everyone's doing the legal things, because none of us want, people doing illegal things out there. So it's nice to have them around.
Yeah, it's your livelihood. You definitely want the resource there, and you want it protected very well.
Exactly.
Let me ask you about some Great Lakes things. I looked on your social, and there I see lake trout, I see brown trout, and I think I saw some salmon and probably some steelhead. Can you tell us the difference on fishing each one of those for you? Is it time of year? Is it fill us in?
Yeah, it's definitely for the trout. It's definitely a time of year. So as far as the open water stage, a lot of times in April, right when that ice goes out and before the bass and walleye season opens, that's when I'm chasing like brown trout, splake. Sometimes we do get a few steelhead too at that time. They're near shore. They're easy to catch with boards. You don't need downriggers. You can go out there with any boat and catch them, and that's a great fishery. Anywhere from Chequamegon Bay all the way around the coast, all the way, to Duluth. There's fish all through there. A lot of cohos, and that's a lot of fun. And then I do a few jigging trips for lake trout in the summer. Not a lot, but I do it a little bit. And that's one of my favorite things to do is we'll go out in 150 feet to 200 feet of water and we'll jig for lake trout. And it's so much more fun than catching them trolling because, you get to feel them hit and you get to fight them all the way up on a lighter rod. And I love doing that. That's a lot of fun. And, most of the times, the fish are anywhere from 5 to 10 pounds, but every year we catch a couple that are 20, 25 pounds. And I mean, you set the hook on one of those in 200 feet of water and your rod just doubles over and it's an absolute blast. And so that's your open water. Now, ice fishing, that's mainly what I target from, let's see, like end of January into the end of March. I'm almost exclusively fishing the Apostle Islands for trout, splake browns, eel pout, whitefish, salmon, lake trout. And, I got a bunch of snowmobiles to get people out. We're fishing shallow first when the ice comes on, anywhere from 10 to 30 feet of water. That's for your shallow fish, your splake and your browns. And then as the ice progresses into the islands, then we'll start chasing lake trout in real deep water. And ice fishing them is a blast too. You're using a small rod in deep water and that's a lot of fun. And that's actually a real big destination. People come from all over the country to come up to the Apostle Islands and ice fish them because there's really not many places on the Great Lakes you can ice fish lake trout. I mean, you can go up into Canada and catch them up there, but the Apostle Islands is pretty cool.
Did you know that America's original manufacturer of canoe and kayak stabilizers was recently featured on Fox and Friends? Spring Creek Manufacturing was recognized on Fox News for being a leader in the Made in the USA industry for their top quality truck racks, the world's best camp saw, and their assortment of water sports equipment, including stabilizers for canoes, kayaks, and stand-up paddleboards, as well as their canoe seats and motor mounts. Enjoy an exclusive 15% off, yes, 15% off your next online order at springcreek.com. with the code LEADER15, that is LEADER 15. Exclusions apply. Now, back to the podcast. You keep mentioning a fish called a splake. For our listeners, can you explain what a splake is?
Yeah, a splake is a cross between a brook trout and a lake trout, and they stock them up here, so they can't reproduce, and they're excellent table fare. I mean, they're really good. They got to be 15 inches to keep. A big one would be 23, 24 inches. They don't get a whole lot bigger than that, but they're a great fish to catch. They stay shallow most of the year, so they're easier for people to get. You don't have to go out 20 miles into the islands to catch them. You can catch them right off the shoreline, and it's a great fishery for them. They keep stocking them. They put a lot of numbers in. The DNR does, and it's a great fishery to have. As a guide, a lot of times that saves the day if the browns aren't biting too good. There's a lot of splake around.
Josh, can you tell us a little bit about you talked about them putting these they don't reproduce, so they're hatching them in the DNR hatcheries and then planting them in the lakes. Can you explain a little bit about what is that whole process? And is that something that just continues on? And do they do it with all species or just splake?
Yeah, they raise them when they're young, and I believe they release them into different harbors and different rivers around Chequamegon Bay and the Apostle Islands when they're about 10 to 12 inches. So they get a little better chance of surviving rather than they're small. But yeah, they stock a lot of splake, and that's usually a yearly thing. They stock them every year. But yeah, they also stock brown trout, lake trout at times, and actually our brown trout fishery is turning into be almost as good as Lake Michigan now. They've been stocking sea forellen browns, which is a different strain of brown trout, and they've been getting pretty big each year. We're seeing them get bigger and bigger. We had a couple this past winter where we were getting them 35, 36 inches. So they're getting to be pretty big. I mean, pushing 15 pounds. So that's a great fishery as well. And they do stock a lot of them.
I want to talk a little bit about your sponsors, but before that, I want to ask a question about the forage. Uh, let's talk about inland, and then we'll bounce over to the Great Lakes. On the inland lakes, you mentioned earlier that this was real clear lake, and you could see the fish coming, a muskie or maybe even your panfish. What is the forage on those inland lakes for the muskies and the bass and the walleyes and the crappies and all of that?
Yeah, most of the inland lakes, the main forage is small perch. That's generally what the fish are chasing. Small perch, small bluegills. Now, a few of the inland lakes have, ciscos, and some of them have just lake shiners or golden shiners that they're chasing. But for the most part, on all of our inland lakes, the main forage is small perch and small bluegills. That's mainly what these fish are chasing.
And the Great Lakes, what are these fish chasing?
The main thing out there is smelt. As I'm sure you know, Lake Superior is full of smelt. Everyone comes up here in the spring to seine for them, and there's just so many smelt out there. The population is just booming right now in Lake Superior. There's a ton of them. That's the main forage. There are a lot of lake shiners out there too, but smelt is the number one. I mean, if you can find the smelt, you'll find the trout. They're always behind them. And then when they come into the spawn in the spring, the walleyes, the bass, the pike will eat them too. So it's a great forage fish to have because there's a lot of them. The fish just love them.
So what I'm hearing is that people, technology, the Department of Natural Resources is doing a good job to keep a healthy ecosystem out there. As much as people might want to complain about it, from what I'm hearing from you, it's a pretty healthy ecosystem, at least in your part of the world, because the forage sounds like it's in really good shape.
Yeah, they do a great job. They're definitely doing what they should be. There's plenty of forage. There's a lot of forage, so you're not going to run out of forage for the fish. So yeah, they're stocking a lot of fish, and it helps greatly. I mean, there's plenty of bait out there for them all.
That's perfect. Josh, as a professional fisherman, you have some sponsors. Tell us how it goes about getting sponsors. You are more than welcome to give your sponsors some love here on the podcast. And what do they do for you?
Yeah, the sponsors are huge for me. They're what they are what allow me to guide every day and have the right equipment and make sure everything's going good. Um, I got most of them through John Gillespie, who's got his TV show. A lot of his sponsors saw that I'm one of his main guides, so they reach out to me and they want to make sure, I'm using the same stuff he's using on the show. And the sponsors help big time. I mean, like Acme Tackle, they make a lot of great products. Spoons, like the Castmaster's been around forever. That's one of our staples, open water and ice fishing. Clam Outdoors, they got a bunch of tents that we use ice fishing all the time. They're a great one. Seagar, they make great fluorocarbon, great line. I use them all the time. Maxport Marine and Superior, they help me out with a boat. If I have a problem with my boat or motor, I can bring it in quick and they can hook me up and get me back on the water guiding. So it's really good to have all those sponsors, and they help me out a lot. And most of the time, they're giving me a lot of gear to use out, or I get a discount and stuff. And some of them will pay you a little bit too if you're promoting them on social media. That's another big one. They want you promoting them on social media as well as in the boat with clients. So, but yeah, they're a huge help. I couldn't do it without them.
Let's talk about the benefits of the layman, me, that, I want to take my son fishing. And what are the benefits to us of hiring you?
Yeah, I mean the biggest thing is you don't a lot of people think about it. You go out and you buy a boat and you buy all this tackle and all this stuff. I mean it adds up to be quite a bit, especially if you only have time to fish, let's say 3, 4 times a year, where, you can hire me for a couple days a year. You can go out. I'm already on the fish. I know where they're going to be. I know what they're biting on. It just saves you a lot of the work trying to find them. And you can go out and have a successful day, and you don't have to worry about all the other stuff that comes along with it. And that's what's so nice about guiding is you can go out, you're going to, catch some fish. You're going to learn a lot, tactics, what to use, what to buy and stuff if you are going to do it on your own too. But it's definitely a big learning curve, and you can cut it down a lot quicker by hiring a guide.
Walk us then through a typical day. So you work from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and that's it. Your days don't start early and they
Yeah.
don't end late, right?
Yep. Yep. Those days are nice. They come along once in a while if I got a half day midday trip. But no, most of the time, like let's say, in the summer, I'm up at 4 a.m. I'm hooking up the boat, getting it ready. A lot of times I do doubles. So what I'll do is I'll get up at 4 a.m. I'll meet clients at 5. We'll fish from 5:30 to 1:30, 2 o'clock. And usually, most of my full day trips are about 8 hours, but a lot of times, 7 hours is enough. And people, they've caught their fair share of fish and they're getting tired and they want to call it. So we'll usually fish about 8 hours, and then I'll drop them off, and then I'll grab lunch somewhere. And then a lot of times too, I'll have a double where I'll have another trip from like 3 o'clock to 8 o'clock. So there's times, I mean, I'm in my boat 12 to 14 hours a day, guiding 2 different groups. And then, I get back home late at night, 10:30, plug the boat in, make sure all the rods are good to go for the next morning, get to bed around 11 and do it all again the next day. So it can be a grind at times. Not every day is like that, but a lot of them are. And it's definitely a grind.
You better love it. I would assume for the people who are listening, or somebody that was young like you and they're listening and going, I'd love to be a fishing guide. A lot of work.
Yeah, yeah, it's not easy. It is a lot of work, and open water is a little easier than ice fishing. Ice fishing can be a grind even more, but open water, yeah, it is enjoyable. I mean, just seeing someone catch their first fish or their biggest fish or taking kids out, it's so rewarding, but it definitely is a grind, and you definitely got to work for it. It's not as easy as some people think.
Josh, can you give us your social handles so our listeners can go look at your different social media and they can find a way to find you?
Yeah, so my Facebook is just Josh Teigen. It's my personal profile. I post all my pictures and stuff on there. Instagram, I post a little bit more on. It's just at josh.teigen. I post a lot of pictures and videos on there. And then I obviously got my website, which is just joshteigen.com. But yeah, that's where I'm posting my pictures and stories and stuff like that.
And videos.
And videos, yep.
Do you have a YouTube page?
I don't. A lot of people are trying to get me to start on that. I've been thinking about it, but I'm not quite there yet. It
Okay.
seems like a lot of people are doing it, but I'm not quite there yet.
All right. Josh, what is your most popular service if you had to say, most people seem to want to hire me to do this?
I would say the number one is Chequamegon Bay for smallmouth bass. I would say Chequamegon Bay is one of the top 5 smallmouth bass fisheries in the country. A lot of really nice fish, anywhere from 3 to 6 pounds. The average fish we catch out there is generally going to be 18 to 20 inches, which, is 4.5 pounds. And there's a lot of them out there. So I spend most of my time, especially open water, guiding out there for smallmouth. That's what most people want to do. And the nice thing out there too, even if you're fishing smallmouth, you always got a chance of catching a pike or a walleye as well. But I mean, on the average day, we catch, on a full day trip, we probably catch 25 to 30 smallies. And, some days are even better when we'll catch 60 to 70. But the nice thing out there is there's so many fish and there's so many big fish that you really don't have a lot of bad days where you only catch a couple. I mean, it's a great fishery. As long as it's not too rough and you can make it out there, you can have a really, really good day.
What is your number one recommendation for beginning fisher people?
Big thing is probably patience. When you get into it in fishing, I mean, you can't expect to just catch them right off the bat. You got to have a lot of patience. And for someone getting into it, I would start small and work their way up. Maybe start with bluegills or crappies. Just get a bobber and a worm and on a rod and throw it out there and start with that, and then work your way up from there. I always tell people, panfish and largemouth bass are the easiest to catch. And if you're getting into it, obviously you're going to want to catch fish, and that's what gets people hooked is catching those fish. So it seems like panfish and largemouth bass are the quickest ways to do that. So that's what I would target as far as species, and they're a little easier to catch. I mean, a lot of times if people are coming up and they email me like, "Hey, we've never fished before. What should we target?" That's generally what we do just to get them into it. And from there, you're going to learn a lot, and you'll work your way up to bigger fish and bigger species. So
Josh, with all this fishing that you do with your service, do you ever get to go to other states or travel other places and do some fishing for fun?
yeah, so I actually do once in a while. I love muskies. That's my favorite thing to do. So usually in September. September is the best time to muskie fish, in my opinion. I'll travel and I'll go muskie fishing. Last year I went to Green Bay. I went down there muskie fishing, and we got a few big muskies down there. I'll go to the Leech Lake area, fish that area for muskies. That's really fun for me to go over there. One of these years I should go up to Canada and do some muskie fishing. I haven't done that yet. But yeah, I do travel. I mean, when I take time off, that's usually what I'm doing is fishing. So I'll go somewhere, and I've been thinking about it for a while. One of these years I got to go down and fish the ocean. I've never even seen the ocean, so that's on my bucket list. I need to go fish some saltwater fish. I've heard they pull a lot harder than our freshwater fish.
That would be a challenge when you get into a muskie to find one tugging harder than that. Josh, your biggest muskie to date?
I've got a couple muskies that are 52 inches, that were probably pushing 35 to 37 pounds. Both of them were actually from the St. Louis River, right by you in Duluth there, back when the muskie fishery was really, really good out there before we had that big flood. There were a lot of big muskies out there, and yeah, both of those came from there. Big fish. Both of them ate right at my feet in the figure eight. For those that don't know what a figure eight is, with muskies, they love to follow. So you stick your rod in the water and you do a figure eight pattern with your rod, and a lot of times when they're following, that'll trigger them to bite. And both those fish hit in the figure eight, so I got to watch them eat it. So that was pretty cool when you can see a fish that big eating about 2 inches from you. It's a blast.
52-inch fish. That is a giant. What is the biggest fish that any client has ever landed when they're with you?
So the biggest, it's actually a funny story. I had a guy come up from Texas ice fishing a couple of years ago. So I have a couple buddies that live in Dallas, Texas, and they come up and they brought one of their friends, and they come up every year ice fishing with me. And this guy had never caught a fish through the ice in his life. He had never been on the ice. And we were fishing on Chequamegon Bay just for a mixed bag of species, for trout, whitefish, whatever bites. And I had a tip up out with a dead smelt on the bottom, and that tip up went up, and he goes over there and he sets the hook, and he's like, "I'm snagged on the bottom." And I kind of feel the line a little bit. I'm like, "No, I don't think you're snagged. I think you got a sturgeon on." And after about a 45-minute fight, because I only had a 10-pound test on that, and he pulls up a 60-inch sturgeon through an 8-inch hole. And that was the first fish he's ever caught through the ice. So he was super excited. I mean, we were all excited. So that's the biggest fish I've ever had a client catch, is a 60-inch sturgeon.
That's not even fair to the rest of us. The guys who put in the time, you get a guy in the first timer, he better quit, right?
Oh yeah, I told him right away. I'm like, you better quit after that. I mean, heck, I haven't even caught a fish that big in my life, and here that's his first one through the ice ever. So it was pretty crazy. Yeah, I told him the same thing you said. You should quit while you're ahead.
Can you explain to people what a sturgeon is? Because that's a very prehistoric fish.
Yeah, it's a big prehistoric fish. They got kind of a sucker mouth on them, so they're always feeding on the bottom. But they live to be, I want to say 70 to 80 years old, and they're all over in Lake Superior. We got a lot of them, and they get up to 5, 6 feet long. I'm sure some of them are even bigger than that. But they like cold water, so they're roaming all over Lake Superior. They stay near bottom. We don't target them very often, but we do catch them once in a while on accident. And they're a powerful fish. Their scales are real rough. It's kind of feeling their back is kind of weird. You get hurt once in a while if you're grabbing them because they twist and they got kind of plates to them like you would think a dinosaur would. They're a really cool prehistoric fish.
Oh, that's a really cool story. What is your personal best catch story that you have for our listeners?
My best one is probably a couple winters ago. I was actually supposed to guide ice fishing for lake trout, and we had a big northeaster come in, and we had like 35-mile-an-hour winds. So unfortunately, I had to cancel my guide trip that day. So I had the day off, and of course, on my day off, I decided, you know what, I'm gonna go fishing. So I went to a small little pothole lake here around Iron River, and this lake is only about 60 acres. And I went out there trying to find panfish. I'd always wanted to fish this lake, and I went out there with a couple rods looking for panfish. And I was actually sight fishing in about 2 to 3 feet of water. And I'm looking down my hole sight fishing, and all of a sudden this giant fish comes through my hole. And this thing was huge. I at first thought it was a muskie, and he circles my hole a couple times, looks at my little ice jig, and I couldn't get him to bite it. So I reeled up real quick. I had another rod with a Castmaster actually on it, and I put a little minnow on there, and I dropped it down. And as soon as I dropped that down, I twitched it once, and this fish came in and absolutely smoked it. And I fought this fish for probably 20 minutes, and I'm by myself. I'm in a little one-man shack, and it turns out to be about a 43, 44-inch pike. And it had the biggest build of a pike I'd ever seen in my life. I mean, the story doesn't do it justice. I mean, the pictures of it, you'll see what I'm talking about. But it was so built. I mean, this fish was huge. It had to be over 25 pounds, and I had to reach my arm all the way down to get him to come up the hole because I couldn't turn him with the line I had. So I had to reach all the way down and grab him. And I took a few pictures with a self timer and I released him. But just with the circumstances and how it happened, that's probably my best fish catch story. I mean, it was, and the crazy thing is this lake, there's not even supposed to be pike in there. So I don't know how he got in there, but there's one pike in there and he's huge. And I let him go. So he's probably still swimming out there, but that was a pretty cool memory.
And he's a little bit bigger for somebody else. Good on you for doing that catch and release, because the next generation will have great fish to look at. Where is somewhere that you haven't fished yet that is on your bucket list?
Honestly, I would love to go to Lake of the Woods and muskie fish. I know a lot. I have a lot of buddies that go up there and fish all the time. There's so many islands. I mean, it's just endless on where you can fish. And Lake of the Woods has a great muskie population, and I've always wanted to go up there fishing. So one of these years I got to make it happen. But I've heard there's a lot of 50 inchers up there. The average size fish is in the mid 40s, and you're out in the middle of nowhere. It's in the wilderness. There's not many houses around. You're kind of roughing it, and that's one thing on my list that I'd love to do.
Folks, today our guest is Josh Teigen of Josh Teigen's Fishing Guide Service. So, Josh, we're going to pivot a little bit here. We're going to go personal on you. We're going to find out some personal things about you here, and we call this our Packed Questions segment. Outside of fishing, what's your favorite hobby?
Honestly, it's probably hunting. Growing up, I never hunted. My dad didn't really hunt. And I mean, obviously, everyone in this area loves to deer hunt. And about 10 years ago, I had one of my buddies selling his bow. And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna buy this bow and I'm gonna try hunting. So I got a couple couple cameras that I put in the woods, and of course I had a couple bucks show up on camera, so that got me into it. So that's definitely my other hobby. So I actually take pretty much all of November off, which is it's a usually in between time when I'm not guiding much because the lakes are pretty cold, they're freezing up, but the ice isn't safe enough to walk on yet. So I spend all November hunting. I'll bow hunt and then I'll rifle hunt too. But I love it. I mean, I'm obsessed with it. It's kind of the same feeling I had when I started fishing. I just got that obsession for it, and that's pretty much all I think about when it comes into November. And just being out there in the woods, no one else around, you can sit and relax and just watch wildlife, and it's a lot of fun.
Well, you have your compass oriented just right as a young man. I kudos to you. And folks, he's obviously quite the accomplished hunter because right over his shoulder, which I'm looking at right now, is one heck of a nice whitetail buck. So he knows what he's doing there too. We never know. We might see in the future Josh Teigen's hunting guide service. Who knows what comes, right? Maybe you need a breather at that time of year. Josh, favorite movie?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
I thought you were going to say Moby Dick.
Yeah, that's probably what it should be. I don't know. I'd probably have to say the movie Shooter. I don't know if you've seen it. I've seen it quite a few times. Tom Wahlberg or Mark Wahlberg, and that's probably one of my favorite ones.
Biggest fear?
So a lot of people are gonna make fun of me for this, but my biggest fear, believe it or not, is crayfish. I cannot. Yeah, exactly. I can see you laughing. It's not many people have this fear. So growing up, I used to play with them all the time. The pike chain had a ton of them, and I'd play with them and grab them from the water. And when I was like 7 or 8 years old, I had one of those things, real big one, reach back with one of his giant claws, and he clamped onto me, and I couldn't get him off my finger. And of course I was little, so I freaked out. So ever since then, I've had a fear of crayfish, believe it or not. I'd rather face a polar bear than a crayfish, unfortunately.
We had a guy on our podcast who was attacked by a grizzly bear. I need to put the two of you together, and you can talk about your stories of the crayfish versus the grizzly bear.
Yeah, I'm sure he'd make fun of me for sure because I actually listened to that podcast and that was pretty crazy what happened to him. But yeah, I don't think a crayfish could do that to me.
Holy cow. Well, it did emotionally, I think it must have, right?
Yeah.
And Josh, what is the best piece of life advice that you have ever received?
Honestly, probably just stay humble. There's so many people out there that think they know it all and think they're hot shots and know everything. And the biggest thing is stay humble. Nobody knows it all. Every day I'm learning. There's times I'll fish with people that only fish once or twice a year that come out and they'll teach me a thing or two that I never thought I would have known. So you never know it all, and there's always something to learn. And stay humble and be kind.
Oh, what great advice. And you certainly are as a young man. You have I mentioned earlier, your compass pointing in the right direction. And good on you for learning that at a very young age. Folks, our special guest today is Josh Teigen from Josh Teigen's Fishing Guide Service. Josh, give us all your handles one last time so our customers can come and go fishing with you.
Yeah, you can follow me on Facebook or Instagram. Just type in my name, Josh Teigen. Teigen is Teigen. I have a website, which is just my name, joshteigen.com. And if you have any questions or you want to reach out, you can call my cell phone, which is 715-813-0575.
Say that phone number one more time, please.
715-813-0575.
Josh, thank you so much for being here. This was really fun. The season's coming. Hopefully you have a great season, and you taught us a lot about a career that many of us probably never thought what goes into doing that. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
It has been an absolute pleasure. And folks, until next time, do as Josh does. Unplug from the indoors and recharge in the outdoors.